I think if you want to understand what's happening in Syria, you first have to recognize that Syria has been a cockpit of great power or greater power rivalry for its entire independent existence. It was originally carved out along with Lebanon by French colonialism. It is a creation of that.
Mhm.
The city of Aleppo, which was the first major urban area to be taken by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, is largely French speaking for that reason. And but every one of Syria's neighbors has had its claws in the political
Mhm.
fabric of Syria. For the Turks, it is a problem for, first of all, historically, because it has a significant Kurdish population, which is sympathetic to and linked in the Turkish view to the PKK,
Mhm.
a terrorist Turkish Kurdish party, which is anathema to the Turks.
Mhm.
But more recently, of course, Syria having been basically vivisected by the United States and Gulf Arab countries, Israel, Turkey itself, and Iran, has become the source of about 5 million refugees in Turkey, and the Turks are desperate to have them go home.
Mhm.
So the Turks have been working very hard, apparently, with the victors in this latest move on the Syrian chessboard
Mhm.
to create an effective fighting force, an effective government, which ruled in Idlib, the region in the north of Syria.
Mhm.
And they obviously, on top of this, recently President Erdogan of Turkey had been trying to persuade Bashar al-Assad, the Syrian leader,
Mhm.
to make his peace with the jihadi groups, including Hayat Tahrir al-Sham,
Mhm.
and they were constantly rebuffed. The Russians, who came into Syria, have long had a relationship with the Syrian regime, uh,
Mhm.
basically as far back as the 1950s. The United States, for that reason, has intervened multiple occasions in Syrian politics, trying to overthrow the regime.
Mhm.
It's regime change.
Mhm.
Initially, that was intended to reduce communist and Soviet influence in Syria. More recently, it's been in pursuit of Israeli interests. And anyway, the Russians too had been trying to persuade Bashar al-Assad to make his peace with other Syrian factions and got nowhere. And I think both Turkey and Russia essentially just wrote him off. Their patience ran out. So his foreign supporters, Iran, Turkey, and Russia, were reduced to Iran. And of course, Iran has been uh, crippled in terms of its regional influence by the Israeli decimation of Hezbollah, the Shiite Lebanese uh, quasi-fascist militia movement. And Hezbollah, in fact, withdrew from Syria in response to Israeli attacks in Lebanon, having to concentrate on that. So that support for the regime also disappeared. And Iran did not have the capability to protect it against the insurgency we've just seen.
Mhm.
Final point, I think, is that Israel, from the beginning, has wanted to fragment Syria. Syria is a mosaic of minorities. The Bashar al-Assad family are Alawite Muslims. This is a rather unique branch of Shiism, uh,
Mhm.
not recognized by Iran as Shiite. The Syrian regime has always been secular under the Assad family, and although they favored the Alawites,
Mhm.
there's been, for example, equality between men and women. Women serve in the armed forces, much as is the case in Israel. So
Mhm.
the Israelis have an agenda of cutting off Lebanon, Hezbollah, from Iranian logistical support,
mm,
and they've just succeeded.
mm.
So I think it's very hard to straighten out which foreign patron did what in this
Okay.
situation. Um, but the problem now, first of all, um, Israel has succeeded in driving Hamas underground in Gaza. It
Mm,
has not succeeded in destroying it. It has decimated Hezbollah. Of course, it decapitated its leadership with a terrorist act of using pagers and mobile phones as explosives, killing a lot of innocent Lebanese, including children, by doing that. Um, but it has essentially established its hegemony in the entire Levant now.
mm,
And the big question is whether Abu Muhammad al-Jolani, the leader of the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, will
mm,
be able to hold Syria together, or whether it will fly apart,
mm,
achieving the long-term Israeli objective of reducing it to multiple ethnic enclaves, all at
mm.
war with each other. So we don't know what's going to happen.
Right.
But you used the word seismic in relation to the change in the region, meaning the Levant. I think that's correct. A final observation, and that is that now that Iran has been essentially deprived of its frontline partners,
Mm,
meaning Hamas and Hezbollah, in terms of their effective ability to join Iran in reprisal against Israel's attacks on Iran, Iran is now going to be under huge pressure
mm,
from its own people to go ahead and develop the nuclear weapon it has not developed. And every intelligence service that has looked at this has concluded that Iran, in fact, did not have a bomb program. It had not made a decision to build a bomb. And mainly this is due to religious scruples. The Iranian position is that nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction are haram, they are forbidden in Islam. Now that is going to be under huge pressure to change. So this is really a major development in the region,
mm,
and I don't think its importance can be understated by any means. The Assad family went first to the United Arab Emirates, and then, as you mentioned, have taken a political asylum in Moscow. I think we're not going to hear much from them in the future.
mm,
But there is that regime, I guess many people will say that it got what it deserved. It Bashar al-Assad inherited the position of president from his father, Hafez al-Assad.
mm,
He promised reform and change and liberalization, but he did not deliver that.
mm,
And in fact, over the course of his 13 years as the leader of Syria, he came to rely ever more on the security forces, which are known for their uh, brutality uh,
mm,
and murderousness. And I think it would be fair to say that he remained in power not because anybody um, really supported him
mm,
strongly, other than the Alawites whom he favored,
mm.
but because everybody looked at him and they saw no viable alternative.
Right.
It seemed to be anyone who would be better, and they feared what might follow him, and I think that was correct. Now, this is the challenge for Mr. Al-Jolani. Uh,
Mm,
or actually, his name is Shara. His real name is Shara, Ahmed Hussein Shara. I think he now faces a real test, whether he can convince Syrians that his movement has sufficient tolerance and wisdom to lead the country toward peace
mm,
and reconstruction, because Syria has been virtually dynamited by the civil war that broke out in 2011.
right.
So I think this is all very mysterious to people who haven't been paying attention to what was going on in Syria.
Mm.
The tremendous suffering of the Syrian people may now have come to an end, or at least a break point, but we don't know.
We don't know. And hearing you explain this, I'm just thinking Syria just the subject of another geopolitical experiment by the superpowers, and that's the long tradition of colonial powers in these regions. I'm wondering if we can elaborate just a bit more on the various actors, their interest, and who is supporting them. And you've mentioned the United States, Israel, Russia, Iran, uh,
Turkey.
Turkey. And then because the frenzy on social media, at least between different factions, of course, a lot of people are joyous about the fall of the Assad regime, but a lot of people are like, this is just another Western NATO, Turkey, United States backed group that has come to, replace one horrible government with another puppet government that is going to do the bidding of the West. What do you make of that?
I don't agree with that thesis. I think what has been happening in West Asia generally,
Mm,
beginning with the Iranian Islamic Revolution and continuing to this day in various forms, has been the end of external
mm,
patronage direction and the emergence of indigenous forces or forces within the region
mm,
that determine the future of the countries there. I mentioned that big winner in all of this is Israel,
right.
which is, of course, part of the region, even if it behaves in a manner that causes everyone else in the region to reject it. But one major change I should have noted, and I didn't, is that in the previous efforts to overthrow the Assad government and produce regime change in Syria had
Mm,
strong backing from some Gulf Arab countries.
mm,
But more recently, beginning with the United Arab Emirates and continuing to Saudi Arabia and Bahrain, the Gulf Arabs had made their peace with the Assad government. They are no friends of Al Qaeda. Al Qaeda has its major objective is the overthrow of the monarchy in Saudi Arabia and the control of the holy sites Mecca and Medina,
mm,
and ultimately Jerusalem. Now, here is another factor that I should have mentioned, and that is it appears that Mr. Al Jolani, who is 42 years old, he's a relatively young, vigorous man, has promised Israel that he will establish diplomatic relations with it.
mm,
But at the same time, he's told his followers that they will go on to liberate Jerusalem. So there is a bit of a contradiction there. What it suggests is that Israel was heavily involved in backing this group and probably the CIA too. And there's an interesting contradiction because there is a $10 million bonus on the head of Mr. Al-Jilani, Mr. Shadra, I suppose he's now called, um, and at the same time the CIA, which has a long history of working with Islamist terrorist groups, for example, in Afghanistan against the Soviet occupation,
mm,
has apparently, done this again. So this has empowered Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, but I don't think it's anybody's fool or anybody's puppet, and that is one reason that this moment is so very interesting. We don't know what that movement is going to do now that it has seized power in Damascus.
mm.
So I think this is a different case. Let me make